ISIL's claim of responsibility for the Texas attack is true. It will be the first on U.S. soil. How prevalent could these kinds of attacks become, and what strategies will be needed to prevent them? Joining me now from the U.S. state of Michigan is Richard Chasdi. He's a professor at Walsh College, and he specializes in international security, terrorism, and counter-terrorism studies. Thanks so much for joining us. First of all, do you believe these claims, or is ISIL just being opportunistic? Some analysts believe they've taken their hits, losing ground perhaps in Syria and Iraq. Claiming responsibility, of course, gets them back front and center in the news again.
Well, this is an interesting question, and it really depends on how you define connections to organizations. In an internet-connected world, it could be a different sort of definition where it's conceivable that you can claim that this is an attack by ISIL if, in the broader sense, you're looking at the set of interconnections that people have through the internet to websites that proclaim the ideology that ISIL espouses. I think if there's a firm connection to ISIL, this would indeed be a breakout event. But I think that remains unclear at this point. But it wouldn't be the first time that a terrorist organization makes a claim for an act in an opportunistic way without a hard involvement with that act.
Richard, let's take the definition bending concept that you were just talking about. If we were to extend it out that way, do you think we could see more ISIL-linked attacks on U.S. soil and in countries beyond where ISIL is based, perhaps lone wolves, I guess you might term these people?
I think that's very possible. And I think given the lone wolf phenomena that I've done some significant research on in terms of looking at some of the common characteristics, that this is something that is a real threat. Now, one of the things that we have to think through is that in an interconnected, globalized community, some of the traditional concepts that we've used to define, for example, domestic terrorism from international terrorism become cloudy. And for example, the so-called Times Square bomber, Walsh College, was a naturalized American, originally from Pakistan, who received training either in Afghanistan or in Pakistan and returned to the United States. So what do you call that? Domestic terrorism or international terrorism? And in an interconnected, globalized, intensive globalized world, some of the traditional concepts, which in terms of whether we look at these two individuals in Texas as being linked to ISIL, this is a characteristic of the new frontier that we have to deal with.
Not an easy frontier, to say the least. Reports, of course, saying one of these gunmen actually created some posts on Twitter. How closely is social media being tracked by authorities? How do they track people on terror lists?
Well, they track social media very closely. And in this case, this individual had problems with the authorities. And evidently, there was a Sudanese woman that was used as an FBI informer who got to know Elton Simpson and taped several conversations that they had, extensively recorded those conversations. He was charged with lying to an FBI official, and it was decided that the more serious charge of engaging in violent jihad would not be pursued because there was a lack of evidence.
You know, a lot of people looking at the FBI, noting that he was out there, that they were aware of him. I guess it lends credence to the more broader question: how do governments prevent future attacks? I mean, if you know somebody's out there and you have difficulty preventing it, what can they do?
Well, intelligence gathering is pivotal. In the United States, we at the NCTC have a data storehouse which is called TIDE. And TIDE, in addition to information from the FBI on domestic terror, nearly instantaneously on a daily basis, transmits information to something called the Terrorism Screening Database, which is compiled by the Terrorism Screening Center. That, in turn, is the basis for a host of different no-fly lists or other prohibitive lists, but people fall through the cracks. And in fact, Omar Farouk Abdul-Muttab the so-called underwear bomber, and the Times Square bomber, where two individuals that you commonly note have fallen through the cracks. So this is a significant issue. Data intelligence gathering is important, and effective and sustained work with federal agencies such as the FBI, with communities in the Somali community, for example, here in the Arab American community in Dearborn. These are important imperatives that need to be continued.
Richard Chasdi joining us from Michigan with analysis. Thanks so much.